If you've ever argued about power scaling in One Piece using bounty numbers, I'm about to completely shatter your worldview. Bounties in One Piece have absolutely nothing to do with how hard someone can punch. They never did. And if you think about it for longer than 5 seconds, the entire system falls apart the moment you try to use it as some kind of Dragon Ball style power level indicator. Because if bounties actually measured strength, then we've got some seriously ridiculous problems to explain. Think about what a bounty actually is for just a second. It's a wanted poster. It's the government saying to the world, we will pay you this much money to bring us this person, dead or alive. Now ask yourself this question. Why would the government pay 3 billion berries for someone? Is it because that person can destroy an island with their pinky finger? Or is it because that person represents something far more dangerous to the people in power? Kuzan spelled it out perfectly when he said the size of your bounty doesn't only reflect the threat your combat abilities pose, it also shows how dangerous you are to the government. That's a direct quote. The government itself is telling us that bounties measure danger to their authority, not raw fighting power. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. If we actually believed that bounties were about strength, then we'd have to accept that an 8-year-old child was stronger than most veteran pirates. We'd have to believe that a talking reindeer who can cure deadly plagues and fight commanders is less threatening than a random thug in the East Blue. We'd have to convince ourselves that a guy who can't use haki and loses fights to random opponents deserves to be called an Emperor of the Sea with a 3 billion berry bounty. Does any of that sound right to you? Because it shouldn't, and that's exactly the point. The bounty system in One Piece is political propaganda disguised as a power ranking. It's a scoreboard that the world government controls to serve their interests. They raise and lower numbers based on what threatens their grip on power, not based on who would win in a fair fight. And once you understand this, suddenly every seemingly inconsistent bounty in the entire series makes perfect sense. Let's start with the most obvious example that proves bounties have nothing to do with strength. Nico Robin received a 79 million berry bounty when she was 8 years old. 8. She couldn't fight. She had no combat experience. She couldn't defend herself against a single marine soldier, but the world government slapped a bounty on her head that was higher than most experienced pirate captains in paradise. Why? Because she could read poneglyphs, because she possessed knowledge that could unravel the lies the government built their entire system on. Her bounty wasn't measuring her strength, it was measuring how terrified the government was of what she knew, and that bounty stayed frozen for decades because the government wanted her dead or captured before she could share that knowledge with anyone who might actually do something with it. Now flip that around and look at Tony Chopper. This is a devil fruit user who can transform into multiple forms, including a monster point that caused massive destruction at Eni's lobby. He's fought against pacifistas, he's battled against commanders of Yonko crews. He cured a deadly virus created by one of Kaido's top officers that was turning an entire island's population into zombies. His medical knowledge alone makes him invaluable to any pirate crew, and his combat abilities have been demonstrated repeatedly throughout the series. So what's his bounty? 1,000 berries total. The government values Chopper less than a decent meal at a restaurant. Why? Because they think he's a pet. Because he looks cute and harmless, so they don't perceive him as a threat despite everything he's actually accomplished. His bounty has nothing to do with his actual capabilities, and everything to do with how the Marines perceive him based on appearance. These examples are just the tip of the iceberg. The entire bounty system is riddled with cases that make zero sense if you're trying to use them as power rankings. But they make perfect sense when you realise what the system actually measures. By the way, if you like these kinds of breakdowns, consider subscribing. I do these every week, and that way you won't miss the next one. Let's talk about the most absurd bounty jump in the entire series. Buggy the Clown went from 15 million berries to over 3 billion berries practically overnight. 3 billion. That puts him in the same conversation as Shanks, Blackbeard and Luffy. Now, did Buggy suddenly unlock some hidden power that made him thousands of times stronger? Did he awaken some secret ability that lets him compete with the strongest fighters in the world? He didn't get stronger at all. What happened was that Buggy's crew made a poster putting him at the centre of the Cross Guild, with Mihawk and Crocodile flanking him on either side. The world government saw that poster and assumed Buggy was the leader, commanding 2 of the most dangerous individuals on the planet. They didn't evaluate his personal strength. They evaluated what it would mean if someone had enough influence and charisma to make the world's second strongest swordsman and a former warlord serve under them. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The system isn't just flawed by accident, it's deliberately manipulated. We've seen multiple cases throughout the series where bounties were artificially suppressed or inflated based on political convenience rather than actual threat assessment. Arlong paid off Captain Nezumi to keep his bounty low so he could operate in the East Blue without attracting attention from headquarters. His actual threat level was way higher than his 20 million berry bounty suggested, but corruption in the system kept that number down. The government's own officials were taking bribes to misrepresent how dangerous someone actually was. Then you've got the warlord system, which is maybe the clearest example of how political the whole thing is. When pirates joined the Seven Warlords, their bounties were frozen, not removed. Frozen. Doflamingo's bounty was stuck at 340 million berries, but that number represented what he was worth before he became a warlord. It didn't account for the decade plus of criminal activity he engaged in while under government protection. It didn't reflect him running an underground weapons trade, manipulating entire countries, or building a criminal empire that spanned the globe. Crocodile's bounty was frozen at 81 million berries from back when he was a rookie, but during his time as a warlord, he took over a country, built a criminal organisation called Baroque Works, and nearly obtained an ancient weapon. His frozen bounty made him look weak compared to New World standards, but his actual threat level was astronomically higher. The government deliberately keeps these numbers frozen because it serves their political interests. They want these pirates working for them, so they stop updating the public threat assessment. It's not about accuracy, it's about control. And then there's the inflation problem that nobody talks about. Dory and Broggy had bounties of 100 million berries each back when they were active over a century ago. When they showed up again during the Egghead arc, those bounties got adjusted, not just for their recent actions, but for economic inflation over the past 100 years. The value of money changed. What constituted a high bounty in their era is completely different from what constitutes a high bounty now. This brings us to maybe the most important question about the bounty system. If bounties aren't about power levels, then what are they actually measuring? What makes someone worth 10 million versus 100 million versus 1 billion berries? The answer is complicated because it depends on multiple factors that all feed into the government's perception of threat. Combatability is part of it, sure, but it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The government considers your actions, your affiliations, your knowledge, your influence, your potential to inspire others, and most importantly, how much you threaten their control over the world. Dragon is called the world's most wanted man, and his bounty is likely higher than most emperors, not because he's necessarily the strongest fighter in the series, but because he leads a revolutionary army that directly opposes the world government's authority. He's not just committing crimes, he's building a movement to overthrow the entire system. That makes him infinitely more dangerous in the government's eyes than even the strongest pirate who's just looking for treasure and adventure. Now let's talk about what bounties were originally supposed to accomplish versus what they've actually become. In theory, bounties serve multiple purposes for the world government. They alert the public about dangerous criminals. They incentivize bounty hunters to capture or eliminate threats. They create a public ranking system that makes the government look strong when they capture high-value targets. And they serve as propaganda to control the narrative about who the good guys and bad guys actually are. But here's the thing. There are almost no bounty hunters left in the One Piece world. Think about it. How many active bounty hunters have we actually seen in the series? Pirates got too strong. The New World became too dangerous. The risk-to-reward ratio stopped making sense for anyone who wasn't already at the top of the power hierarchy. Why would a bounty hunter go after someone worth 500 million berries when that person can split islands in half? The economic incentive that was supposed to drive the whole system fell apart. So what are bounties now if they're not actually motivating bounty hunters to hunt? They become trophies, status symbols. Pirates treat their bounties like achievements in a video game. Higher numbers mean more prestige in the pirate world. It's completely divorced from the system's original purpose. The government posts these wanted posters, and instead of inspiring people to hunt these criminals, it just makes the criminals more famous. It advertises their accomplishments. It turns them into legends. The system backfired so spectacularly that it's now actively helping pirates build their reputations instead of bringing them to justice. And then Cross Guild showed up and flipped the entire game on its head. Buggy, Mihawk and Crocodile created a bounty system for Marines. They put prices on the heads of government officers. Suddenly, the hunters became the hunted, and the whole world had to confront an uncomfortable question. If bounties represent justice, then what does it mean when someone puts a bounty on the people who issue bounties? Cross Guild exposed the hypocrisy built into the system. The government has been using bounties as propaganda to label their enemies as criminals, while positioning themselves as the good guys maintaining order. But what happens when someone with enough resources and influence decides to play the same game? What happens when they say, actually, these Marines are the real criminals and will pay you to bring them in? The entire moral framework collapses. The government's bounties say these pirates are criminals. Cross-Guild's bounties say these Marines are criminals. And suddenly it becomes obvious that the whole system is just political theatre. But what do the numbers actually mean? They mean the government is scared. That's it. When you see a bounty increase, you're not seeing an accurate assessment of someone's fighting ability. You're seeing the world government's fear response. You're seeing them try to signal to the world that this person needs to be stopped before they become too dangerous to control. Robin's bounty at age 8 wasn't about her being strong, it was about the government being terrified of what would happen if she lived long enough to share what she knew. Buggy's 3 billion berry bounty isn't about his strength, it's about the government being terrified of what it would mean if he actually controlled the forces they think he commands. Dragon's bounty isn't about his devil fruit, it's about the government being terrified of the movement he's building. Every bounty is a confession, it's the world government admitting what scares them. Once you understand that, you realise the bounty system reveals way more about the government than it does about the pirates.